The judge's pronouncement, "This marriage is hereby dissolved," should have felt like a verdict. Instead, for Parker, it felt like a bizarre, bureaucratic undoing of a sacrament. They had stood before their community, their chosen family, and promised forever. Now, they stood in a beige room with fluorescent lights, a state employee making it all null and void with the stamp of a seal. The finality wasn't in the words, it was in the way Cameron, her wife, ex-wife, wouldn't quite meet her eyes, her hand instinctively reaching for the new, empty space on her finger where her wedding ring had been. Their love hadn't ended with a fight, but with a signature. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and hit like. It really helps boost my work and lets me create more lesbian stories for you. The anatomy of a letting go. The salt air used to taste like freedom. For Parker, it was the first breath of every summer morning, a sharp, clean promise carried on the Pacific breeze that swept over the cliffs of their Oregon home. She would stand on the deck of the house she shared with Cameron, her bare feet on the cool, damp wood, and feel the world settle into a perfect, crystalline alignment. Wife. The word was a talisman, a solid, warm stone in the palm of her heart. My wife, Cameron. Now, the same air was just cold. It was January, and the freedom had curdled into a vast, empty expanse. The house, their sanctuary, felt like a beautifully constructed museum exhibit titled A Marriage That Was. It had been 7 months since Cameron had said the words that dismantled their world. They hadn't been shouted. They hadn't been hissed in anger. They had been spoken softly, over a Tuesday night dinner of roasted vegetable pasta, a recipe Parker had learned because it was Cameron's favorite. "Parker," Cameron had said, putting down her fork with a finality that made Parker's stomach drop. "We need to talk. It's Taylor." Taylor. The name had hung in the air between them, not a surprise, but a confirmation of a dread Parker had been swallowing for weeks. Taylor was the new curator at the art gallery Cameron managed. Parker had met her at the autumn opening, a woman with a laugh like wind chimes and eyes that saw everything. Parker had seen the way Cameron's entire being leaned into that laughter, a subtle gravitational pull she had dismissed as professional admiration. "What about Taylor?" Parker had asked, her voice unnaturally calm, a life raft in a suddenly churning sea. Cameron's eyes, the color of sea glass, had been full of a terrible, apologetic sorrow. "It's not an affair. Not in the way you think. It's not just sex. I love her, Parker. And I am so sorry. But I can't be here anymore and not be entirely here." The confession was not a knife, it was a slow, spreading ice, freezing everything in its path. Their marriage, their future, the very air in the room, everything solidified around Parker, trapping her. The months that followed were a study in surreal pain. Cameron moved out that weekend, taking a suitcase of clothes and her collection of art books to Taylor's minimalist apartment in the city. Parker stayed in the cliffside house, surrounded by the ghost of their life together. Every object was a landmine. The coffee mug Cameron had thrown on the pottery wheel, the photograph from their hiking trip in Iceland, the indentation on Cameron's side of the bed that slowly, agonizingly, faded. The divorce proceedings were civil, a stark contrast to the emotional carnage. Cameron, racked with guilt, was relentlessly fair with the assets. She didn't want the house. She didn't want their shared savings. She just wanted out. Parker, a landscape architect whose job was to nurture growth from soil, felt barren. Her work suffered. Colors seemed muted. The intricate plans for a new public garden felt meaningless. How could she design ecosystems of beauty when her own had been so thoroughly scorched? Her friends rallied around her, a protective phalanx of rage and support. They called Cameron a coward, a cliché. They vilified Taylor as a homewrecker. Their anger was a fuel Parker couldn't quite ignite. Her own emotion was a heavier, duller thing, a grief so profound it was almost silent. She missed Cameron with a physical ache. She missed the way she hummed off-key in the shower, the specific weight of her head on Parker's shoulder during movie nights, the way she would get paint on the doorknobs and never quite notice. She missed her best friend. But intertwined with the missing was the image of Cameron with Taylor. She tortured herself with it, imagining them cooking together in Taylor's sleek kitchen, laughing in a way she and Cameron hadn't in years. She imagined the new, uncomplicated love, free from the weight of shared history and domestic routine. The thought was a constant, low-grade poison. One rainy afternoon, sorting through a box of old letters for the lawyer, Parker found a card Cameron had written for their 3rd anniversary. The words were achingly familiar. "With you, I am more myself than I ever knew I could be. You are my favorite place." Parker sat on the floor of the study, the card pressed to her chest, and wept until she was hollow. Was Taylor her favorite place now? The legal divorce was finalized on a bright, cruel day in April. It was a sterile, administrative end, signed in a beige office with fluorescent lighting. They exchanged a few stiff, necessary words. Cameron looked tired and beautiful, her hand devoid of the wedding band she'd already stopped wearing months ago. Parker still wore hers, a stubborn, silver band on her left hand. She couldn't bring herself to take it off. After the papers were signed, Cameron hesitated. "Parker, can we talk? Just for a minute. Outside?" Parker nodded, numb. They stood on the sidewalk, the spring sun doing little to warm the chill between them. "I never wanted to hurt you," Cameron said, her voice thick. "You have to know that. You are the best person I know." The words felt like ashes. "Then why?" Parker asked, the question she had disciplined herself not to ask finally breaking free. "Was it me? Was I not enough? Did we just stop trying?" Cameron shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No. God, no. That's the terrible part. It wasn't that you weren't enough. It was that. I met her, and it was like I'd been reading a book by candlelight my whole life, and someone suddenly turned on a lamp. I saw everything in a different light. I saw myself differently. It wasn't about something you lacked. It was about something I found in myself, with her." It was the most honest and the most devastating thing Cameron had ever said to her. It offered no villain, no simple fault line Parker could blame. It was just a tragic, terrible truth. Sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, a person can outgrow the love that once fit them perfectly. Parker just nodded, unable to speak. She watched Cameron walk away, get into a car where Taylor was waiting in the passenger seat, and drive off. That night, alone in the silent house, Parker finally took off her wedding ring. She didn't throw it away. She placed it in a small wooden box on her dresser, a relic of a life that was true and beautiful, even if it wasn't forever. The healing was slow. It was 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Some days, the anger finally arrived, hot and cleansing. Other days, the grief would pull her under without warning in the cereal aisle of the grocery store. 6 months after the divorce, Parker received a package. It was a small, flat rectangle, wrapped in simple brown paper. The return address was Taylor's apartment. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a note from Taylor and a small, framed watercolor painting. The note was written in an elegant, looping script. "Parker, I know I am the last person you want to hear from. I have wrestled with whether to send this for months, and I apologize if this oversteps or causes you any more pain. That is not my intention. Cameron has been sorting through the last of her things from the house and found this. She painted it the summer you were married, from the deck looking out over the sea. She said it was the day you two saw the pod of whales. She wanted you to have it, but she didn't know if she could send it herself. I told her I would. I know you must hate me. I understand that. But I want you to know, from my own heart, that the love Cameron has for you is a permanent part of her. It is not gone. It is just different now. She speaks of you and your time together with a reverence I know is real. You built a beautiful world together, and the fact that it ended does not erase its beauty. I am not your enemy. I am just a woman who fell in love. I am sorry for the wreckage that came with that. With respect, Taylor." Parker picked up the painting. It was Cameron's work, unmistakably. It captured the exact quality of that summer light, the vast, hopeful blue of the ocean, the dark, sleek forms of the whales breaking the surface. In the corner, Cameron had written the date and a tiny, almost invisible P+C. Parker cried. But for the first time, the tears were not just of loss. They were of awe. Awe for the breathtaking, painful complexity of the human heart. Or for the love that had been real? Or for the strange, impossible grace of the woman who had, in a way, taken everything from her, and who had now, with profound empathy, given something back? She didn't hate Taylor. In that moment, she understood. Cameron's heart had simply expanded in a direction Parker wasn't in. It wasn't a rejection. It was a redirection. A year to the day after the divorce was finalized, Parker was planting a new row of lavender in her garden. The phone rang. It was Cameron. "Hi," Cameron said, her voice tentative. "Is this a terrible time?" "No," Parker said, wiping her earthy hands on her jeans. "It's okay." They talked for a few minutes, superficial, safe things. The weather. Work. Then Cameron said, "Taylor and we're moving. To Chicago." Her dream job came through. Parker felt the news settle. It was a final period on a sentence that had long been finished. That's great, Cameron. Really. Congratulations." "Thank you," Cameron said. There was a long pause. "Parker, I don't know if I ever properly apologized. For the way I handled it all. For the pain." "You did," Parker said softly. "And it's okay." And in that moment, she realized it was, somehow, starting to be okay. The wound was scar tissue now, tough and resilient. It would always be there, a part of her history, but it no longer defined her present. "I'm glad you found your person, Cam," Parker said, and she meant it. The words were a release. She heard Cameron's soft intake of breath, a small sob. "You were my person, too. For a beautiful, long time. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." They hung up. Parker looked out at the ocean, the same view from the painting, from 1,000 cherished memories. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The salt air filled her lungs. It didn't taste like freedom yet. But it no longer tasted like ice. It tasted like possibility. It tasted, slowly, like a future she would now have to build for herself, not as half of a whole, but as a whole herself, shaped and scarred and strengthened by a great love that had, against all odds, ended, but had never, ever been a failure. The aftermath. 1 year later. The air in the new gallery was crisp and cool, smelling of fresh paint and possibility. Parker stood just inside the entrance, her hands tucked into the pockets of a tailored blazer she'd bought for herself, a small act of reclamation. On the walls hung her photographs, not the landscape she was known for, but a series of intimate, black and white studies of light and shadow on the female form. It was work that was vulnerable, brave, and entirely her own. The opening was a quiet success. Friends, colleagues, and a few critics milled about, their murmurs a pleasant hum. For the first time in over a year, Parker felt a sense of calm pride that was entirely separate from anyone else. This was hers. Then, she saw them. Cameron and Taylor stood by a photograph near the back, their hands loosely linked. They hadn't seen her yet. Parker watched them for a moment, her heart performing its old, familiar acrobatics, a lurch of pain, a flutter of nostalgia, then a slow, steady settling. They looked happy. Cameron was pointing to something in the photograph, speaking softly to Taylor, who listened with a small, attentive smile. It was a quiet, intimate moment, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a personal assault on Parker's history. It just was. She took a steadying breath and walked over. Cameron saw her first. Her eyes, that sea glass green, widened slightly, then softened with a nervous warmth. "Parker." "You came," Parker said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. "We wouldn't have missed it," Taylor said, her voice gentle. "These are incredible, Parker. Truly." Her compliment was genuine, devoid of the guilt or pity that had once tinged their every interaction. "Thank you," Parker said, and found she meant it. An awkward silence descended, the kind that was inevitable. The three of them, a living diagram of a closed loop, the past, the present, the catalyst. Cameron gestured to the photograph they'd been looking at. It was a close-up of a windowpane, rain streaking down the glass, the world outside blurred into abstract, beautiful shapes. "This one, it feels like that winter. In the house on the cliff." Parker nodded. "It is. It was the winter everything had fallen apart. The winter she'd learned to see the world through the distorting lens of grief. "It's not sad," Cameron observed quietly. "Her curator's eye seeing the truth of it. It's peaceful. It's about finding a new kind of beauty in the distortion." "That was the idea," Parker said. Their eyes met, and for a second, it was just them. Two people who had loved each other profoundly and failed each other terribly, acknowledging the art that had been born from the wreckage. There was no going back. The love they'd shared was no longer a home either of them could live in, but it had become a foundation. They had built Gezu Shindesenghua on its sturdy, broken ground. "We should let you get back to your guests," Taylor said, sensing the depth of the moment and gracefully offering an exit. She squeezed Cameron's hand. "I'll just go grab our coats." Cameron nodded, and Taylor moved away, leaving them alone for a moment. "I'm really proud of you, Parker," Cameron said. The words were simple, but they landed with a profound weight. This wasn't the pride of a wife or a partner. It was the pride of a witness. Someone who had seen the raw material and could appreciate the finished, stronger form. "Thank you, Cam," Parker said. "For coming." Cameron hesitated, then asked the question that had likely been on her mind all night. "Are you okay?" Parker looked around the gallery, at her work on the walls, at the life she was building stitch by careful stitch. She thought of the quiet apartment she'd rented, filled with her own things. She thought of the tentative coffee dates she'd been on, the rediscovery of her own company. "I'm getting there," she said, and it was the most honest answer she could give. She wasn't healed, not completely. The scar would always be there. But it was just a scar now, a reminder of a wound that had closed, not an open bleeding thing. Cameron's smile was relieved, tinged with a sorrow that would likely always be there, too. "Good. That's good." Taylor returned with their coats. There were a few more polite, parting words, congratulations, goodbyes, wishes for safe travel back to Chicago. Parker watched them walk out into the evening, Cameron's head tilted toward Taylor's, their figures merging into the flow of people on the sidewalk. She felt a final, quiet click of closure, like the satisfying latch of a well-made box. Later, as the gallery emptied, Parker stood before the photograph of the rain-streaked window. Cameron was right. It wasn't sad. The distortion was beautiful. It offered a new way of seeing. The love she'd shared with Cameron had been real and magnificent. Its end had been brutal and true. Both things could exist at once. One didn't cancel out the other. The marriage had not been a failure because it ended. It was a chapter that had reached its conclusion. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped out into the cool night air. She didn't know what came next, and for the first time in a long time, the uncertainty felt less like fear and more like freedom. She was just Parker. And that, she was finally starting to believe, was enough.